Welcome to MGT559 Contemporary Issues in Leadership. I'm your lecturer for this session and my name's Hetty Bryant. Let's just progress. I'm just going to go over the subject, the learning objectives, how the subject's set up, how we'll be learning together, what the underlying narrative is, etc. So let's get into the learning objectives. So, be able to identify and discuss how leadership is mobilised in relation to a range of contemporary challenges. So, what you're going to be looking at is you're going to be looking at contemporary media, current affairs, literature, your text, etc. And you'll be identifying some contemporary challenges that are facing you in your leadership. Or facing leaders if you're not leaders yourself but aspiring to be a leader. You'll be able to critically engage in discussions about the ethical dimensions of leadership, and your text is the underlying narrative of the text is about the ethical dimensions of leadership, and more important in our world that we're looking at ethical dimensions of leadership of professional practice. And we'll work through the critical engagement piece as well as we work through the text. So I don't want you to be put off by those words just now. And you'll be able to build a theoretical framework for the practice of leadership in the face of your contemporary challenges. So there'll be a fair bit of theory, but it'll actually be very useful theory that you can then use in your practice, and then you'll be able to effectively articulate and put this theory into practice in some interventions in an intervention plan. And we'll talk about that in the context of assessment. Now, the essential elements of the actual subject are leadership, experience of real-world issues. So as I said, we'll be using a lot of current affairs, contemporary and scholarly literature in your text, but we'll be looking at real-life world issues, and this is underpinned by ethical and societal dilemmas, and how important it is to look at the ethics for society today and bring into the wider world context. We'll also be looking at discourses of leadership, and I'll just try and stop this from going any further. It will keep going, but I just wanted to read you from Simon Weston's recent book about what a discourse is. So what is a discourse? Over the past century, 4 key discourses have emerged, we'll talk about in a minute, that dominate leadership thinking. A discourse, in this sense, is an underlying set of assumptions that becomes accepted as the norm. It affects and shapes our views about something. For many people, leadership means a heroic, charismatic figure, but there are other discourses of leadership. These determine how leadership is enacted and spoken about, but they are not always explicitly known to us. It's related to power as a way to control and normalize ways of thinking and being. As Judith Butler says, discourse defines the limits of acceptable speech. A discourse determines what can be said and also what cannot be said. It impacts on our views, our self-perception, and it is not possible to escape discourse. Okay, so when we talk about the 4 discourses of leadership, which are controller, therapist, messiah, and eco-leader, we're talking about the underlying assumptions, the ways of knowing about the way we engage, the way we think about leadership. It's not about leadership styles or traits, it's about the accepted norms of leadership. And we'll step through these right through the text and right through the session, so you'll actually understand this a lot more. And all of this is underpinned by eco-leadership, which is a distributed leadership. It's a post-heroic. It's not a singular person. It's about leadership being shared in relational spaces. So it's not just about one person, the captain on the ship. It's about many people operating at leadership at all different levels of your organisation and society as well. You'll also be looking at organisational and practice interventions, experiential learning, and I'll talk much more about that when we get on to assessment. The learning environment, the Interact 2 site, for those of you who haven't studied at CSU before or are new to it, we always use Interact 2, which is a Blackboard medium. It's an online learning community. This is your landing page. When you get there, on the left-hand side, there's a number of tabs. Go through those. I'll have regular weekly announcements, which remind you of the online meetings, etc., of assessment coming up. Then we have online meetings. Go and link there. We have the schedule for the online meetings. We have discussions. We have online discussion forums. And then we have our learning content, which is in modules and topics. Okay, we have resources to assist you. There's a site there to help you to set up your CSU ThinkSpace, and we'll talk about that a bit in a minute too. And then there's information about assessment, etc. Okay, but the most important is the top one, the subject outline. Always go back to that because it'll show you all your assessment. It'll give you a schedule, everything. Okay, so next, the discussion forums. So the discussion forums are really for you to really engage with your peers in your learning community, and there's about 50 in this subject, so it'll be a challenge. And there'll be weekly guided questions so that you can reflect on things for each topic. Okay, post your response, respond to others in a respectful, positive and constructive way. De-identify yourself as well for your safety. There are a number of students who work in the armed forces, police, etc. It's important that if you have to, please de-identify yourself. It's not a therapy session, so whilst you might want to coach others and give them advice, we don't want to step over into giving that kind of therapy type advice. And everyone will hear and be heard. It's important to listen as well as talk. So try and not jump in all the time and be the first to post and post more than other people. Listen and observe as to what other people are saying too. Really important leadership attribute as well. And there are no wrong answers. So suspend your judgment when people say things. Wonder why you react and think, well, it's just an answer or it's just a statement. Okay? And the learning environment, we have online meetings through Adobe Connect. These are mostly every week. There'll be a lecture or an online chat. They're not through January, there won't be as many. Make sure that you have Adobe Connect on your desktop. Some people use it on their iPhone as well. If you haven't got it, please install it. Also, sometimes organisations' firewalls block you from using Adobe Connect, so get permission from your information technology people, the people that support you, and because it is a requirement, you need to have this, because even if you don't come into the meetings, if you can't come to the meetings, the recording that I make afterwards, you actually have to go in through the Adobe Connect room, so you have to have it. Okay. Next, we have weekly home pages for topics and modules. There might be some mini lectures. There's videos and there's reflective activities and readings, etc. Each week has a module and topic and a commentary with readings, those reflective questions. You're expected to engage in reflective writing, and there's some advice on how to go about that. And Master of Business Leadership students, it's a requirement that you set up a CSU ThinkSpace. For those of you new to the MBL, it's important that you do this. For some students that may have studied in the MBL last session and the lecturer didn't get you to do this, I will be asking you to do this. Other students, it's optional, but it's a great practice to get into, because then you'll have an electronic portfolio if you want to go for promotion. If you're looking at another job, it's a great career electronic portfolio. Keep up to date, as they'll give you a framework for the assessment. So keep up to date with your blogging, keep up to date with your readings. You can scroll ahead if you wish. Some people work at a faster pace. Some people have to get chunks done before they travel for their work. A lot of people travel for their work, or if you're having a week off or whatever. Okay. So assessment items, there are 3. The first one is due on the 23rd of November, so be aware that's only 2 weeks after we start. And it will be, you'll have to identify a contemporary leadership challenge. So that might be something around diversity, it might be something around generational issues, it might be something around social media, etc. But that challenge, you will use that all the way through. So in your second assessment, you will be actually reviewing that challenge and reviewing the literature on leadership to actually talk more, to investigate that more. So you'll be looking at current affairs, you'll be looking at contemporary media, particularly from scholarly sources, and I'll talk more about that as we go along, and you'll be looking at the text, etc., in your readings. To do that review, that's due just before Christmas, so then you can breathe over the Christmas break. And then the last one is due on the 1st of February. That's where you put the theory into practice. You develop a theoretical framework for your practice, and you actually put in place interventions in your workplace or in a community. Some people can't do it in their workplace, or they might be a solo person, so you can do it in the community. So that's due on the 1st of February. So that involves you putting interventions in place with others, working with others to actually address the contemporary challenge that you identified in the first assessment and investigated in the literature, in the review of literature and media in the second assessment. Okay, so this is really very much in, and I've got the picture there of Kolb's experiential learning cycle. Okay, so you'll actually be experiencing these things, and as you experience them, you'll reflect on them, you'll think about ways that you are doing them, whether the theory works, etc., and then you'll plan to do things again, do them differently, and then that'll go round and round again. So this is learning in action, and you'll be required to report on this learning in action in that last assessment, how you actually learned in the subject, how you learned about your contemporary issue, how you learned through enacting a leadership practice through the interventions that you put into place. Okay? And as part of that too, in the first assessment, you'll identify a learning goal, which will have smart objectives, or a SMART goal, which means it'll be specific, measurable, achievable, results-oriented and time-bound. So that learning goal will carry you through to the end, and then you'll report on that as to what you learned against that goal in the last assessment. Okay, let's keep going. So if you need to contact me, email's always preferable. I'm also available by phone. My numbers are there, so if you need to ring from outside of Australia, put the +61 in front. I'm normally here on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, but as I said, it's sometimes better if you send an email and then I can respond to you. But if you do need to speak to me, do. If you've got a question about assessment, I've actually set up an assessment discussion forum, so pop your question up there, and then others can go there and look at the response that I give, because quite often people ask the same questions. So in responding to you, I then answer the question for lots of other people. Okay. We'll see you in the subject. Looking forward to facilitating your learning. Cheers.